Moral Orel is one of the most beloved Adult Swim shows of all time. In fact, it's so popular that even to this day, 16 years after the show got cancelled, fans of the show are still calling for Moral Orel to have a proper ending. And while I have you, only 2.4% of people that watched my last video are subscribed to the channel, so please, do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button as well as the bell. Thank you. So, what made Moral Orel so special? You see, Moral Orel is stylistically similar, but not a parody, of 1960s Davey and Goliath. And Moral Orel is perhaps most well known for its incredibly dark and twisted humor.
They'll never find us up here. Here, Susie, start writing in this diary.
Why, Daddy?
You know, it's good for when you're dead.
Which it utilizes to critique and satirize many elements of American society. In particular, the extremes that Americans will go to protect their religious and political beliefs.
What, is this a communist country or something? I thought this was America!
However, behind the laughs lies an incredibly important message on morality. So, let's get into the show. Moral Orel starts with the episode The Lord's Greatest Gift, which introduces us to Orel Puppington, who, funnily enough, is voiced by the same voice actor as Sandy from SpongeBob. And during this scene, we also get introduced to the rest of his family, who are gleefully singing together in the car in a very Simpsons-esque way.
Reason is the enemy of faith, my friend.
However, don't get too used to this, as this is the last time that we truly see the family being happy together. Anyway, back to the episode, the Reverend gives a scathing sermon on how life is the greatest gift that God ever gave us. And he then warns the congregation that wasting your life is the ultimate sin, as life must be preserved at all costs. And at this point, the show presents the inaugural case of Orel misinterpreting religious messages.
Everyone buried in the cemetery is sinning, Doey. Like the good Reverend said, Lazarus did not reject Jesus' greatest gift of life.
As Orel then convinces his friend Doey that dead people are spitting in God's face because they choose to die. And I mean, this is just brilliant writing, as Orel then takes this misinterpretation to a whole nother level, as he starts literally digging up dead people and bringing them back to life by reading curses. And boy, surely nothing can go wrong with this, right? Well, as you may expect, this doesn't exactly go to plan, and the newly created zombies try to kill everyone in the town. However, the show doesn't deal with this as you may expect. In fact, Orel's father, Clay Puppington, isn't even afraid of these horrific zombies. But rather, the show pretty much disregards the zombies entirely and instead chooses to focus on the warning that Orel receives on taking the word of the Bible too literally.
Those lost commandments always throw me off.
Didn't you notice all the people running away in terror?
And this formula can be seen in just about every episode of Season 1, and it goes a little something like this. Orel learns something in the Bible and then completely misconstrues it and blows everything way out of proportion. At which point, his father comes and rescues Orel from whatever danger he's in and takes Orel to his study. And when the pair are sat down in his study, he will give him a stern but often incredibly inaccurate lecture.
But I don't know if you realize the true danger of crack. Crack is a gateway to slang.
Slang?
Which somehow always misses the point of what Orel was doing wrong in the first place. I mean, hey, at this point, Moral Orel is a pretty fun cartoon. I mean, sure, there are some very risque moments, such as Season 1, Episode 2, where Orel doesn't want his tugging the rope time to be a sin, so he grabs his mum's turkey baster and impregnates the whole town. However, apart from that, after Season 1, you could make the argument that Moral Orel is a fairly run-of-the-mill Adult Swim show that pokes fun at the hive-minded communities of Christianity and showcases signs of rather unethical behavior.
Hallelujah. Shut up, Jesus.
In fact, I believe that in Season 1, Orel acts in a very similar way to Butters from South Park, with his sheer blissful ignorance shielding him from the fact that his father is an obvious homosexual, and that his entire family, as well as every single person in Moralton, is incredibly flawed and dysfunctional. But oh boy, does this quirky comedic tone shift in Season 2. And this shift in tone can be felt almost immediately in Season 2, Episode 1, as Orel's mother, Bloberta, is shown to be openly racist and homophobic and approves of segregation.
I'd say that God wants different people to be separated from us, Orel. That's why he put Europe all the way over wherever he put it.
That's right.
With the entire town joining in on segregating people that don't align with the image of Jesus. And can I just say, this is easily one of the darkest and most backwards things that animation has ever been used for. Well, that is until we go one episode later into Season 2, when Orel finds a dog called Bartholomew in the park. And this isn't just an ordinary dog, as Bartholomew is heavily hinted to be the second coming of Jesus.
You need a name. What do you think we should call you?
And of course, since the town of Morrilton is so backwards, the town quickly becomes resentful of this dog, and its ability to perform acts of good that these townspeople simply cannot. And thus, everyone in the town conspires to get Orel to kill his new dog, which eventually he caves into.
Okay, Dad. I'm gonna have to give Bartholomew up.
Good.
However, just because Moral Orel gets darker in Season 2, this doesn't mean that the show loses its humor completely. In fact, quite the opposite is true, as Season 2 of Moral Orel still has some incredibly comedic moments.
I guess sometimes certain things get misinterpreted.
Like what?
Not sure.
And the comedy within Season 2 comes from a place of depravity, which is almost the complete opposite of the light-hearted goofs and misinterpretations of Season 1, as we start to see that Orel's innocence is being torn away from him, and this is because he starts to peek behind the cracks and realize just how awful his family, as well as the rest of the townspeople, truly are.
I hate you.
However, it's not all bad for young Orel, as towards the middle of the season in episode 8, Orel falls in love for the very first time. With a girl that is essentially the female version of himself, that comes from a family exactly like his. However, of course, as is the way in this season, Orel gets any shred of hope snatched away from him right at the end, as he is forbidden from seeing his crush ever again. And this is all because their families say grace slightly differently.
Those who trespass.
Debtors? Trespassers? What are you, nuts? Get out!
And no, I'm not joking, that's really the reason he's never allowed to see her again. And at this point, you may be thinking, why exactly did the show get so much darker from Season 1 to Season 2? Well, the show's creator, Dino Stamatopoulos, has stated in an interview with Vice that when Moral Orel was first picked up, he had to write the scripts in a very short period of time. So, he just gave then Adult Swim producer Mike Lazo exactly what he wanted, which was a funny show. However, as the show progressed into Season 2, Dino really wanted to dig deeper into the characters. And honestly, this worked really well for Moral Orel, with Mike Lazo himself praising many episodes within Season 2 and saying that it's some of the best television that he's ever watched, which in turn essentially gave Moral Orel the green light to be as emotionally experimental as they'd like. And boy, did they take this to heart. You see, it's almost unanimously agreed upon by the Moral Orel fanbase that the end of Season 2 is when Moral Orel stops being a comedy and becomes more of a tragedy. And this is best seen in the two-part finale of Season 2, Nature, in which Clay takes Orel on a hunting trip to teach him how to be a man. An episode formula which has been utilized by many other animated shows before Moral Orel. However, this isn't your typical coming-of-age storyline. Oh no. It's much darker than that.
Dad!
You see, Clay's alcoholism is on full display here as he gets absolutely wasted, as he starts killing the animals in a particularly cruel way. And after this, he practically forces Orel to try and hunt as well, despite him being visibly uncomfortable at the thought and just wanting to be friends with the animals. And eventually, this pressure from his father becomes too much, and Orel's finger accidentally slips on the trigger, shooting one of the dead animals out of pure stress. And this in turn sets Clay off on a rampage, which ultimately culminates in him shooting Orel in the leg. And of course, since it's Clay, he blames Orel for this.
I got shot by you.
You sure did. You've got to learn to be more careful, son.
And perhaps the darkest part of this entire season is when they eventually get home from this camping trip and Orel asks his mom why his dad changes when he drinks.
When he drinks, he changes.
Oh, he doesn't change, Orel. That's just his true nature coming out.
With season 2 ending as the camera fades out and Orel being forced to contemplate what his mom has just said to him. So, you may be wondering, how does an animation show about a Christian boy possibly get darker than this, to the point where Adult Swim themselves would deem the show too dark? Well, season 3 happens.
Wow! Everyone sure hates Jesus!
And season 3 of Moral Orel completely ditches most comedic elements of the show, instead going straight into hard-hitting stories that mostly don't even involve Orel anymore. Such as Blubberta faking injuries to pleasure her doctor, who then gets off on her suffering.
Here, I'm prescribing you 80 milligrams of Insensitab.
And another storyline which details how Clay scared his mother to her death, and after this, his father replies to him in an incredibly cold manner.
You're not even worth it.
Not worth it?
Which then causes Clay to go out of his way to goad his father into beating him, as he associates this now with his father actually caring about him. And this ultimately leads Clay to beat Orel in the same way, as he believes that beatings are associated with discipline and affection. And boy, that's pretty dark. However, by far the darkest episode in Moral Orel is season 3 episode 4, Alone, which details the trauma of 3 different women, starting with Nurse Bendy, who is treated as nothing but an object by her male counterparts, and had her family taken away by her baby's father. And thus, Nurse Bendy reverts back to a childlike state in which she takes comfort in talking to her toys, as though they are her very own family, despite being fully conscious that they can't talk back.
Hi, family! Sorry I'm late.
And we then see Mrs. Scoptham's trauma of being SA'd by the ice cream man, as she is extremely OCD and agonizingly turns her locks despite physically repelling this action. And in this scene, we also see how the media has victim blamed her for going through this traumatic ordeal, which is an incredibly hard scene to watch as it reflects many of the same attitudes that people have today towards SA, critiquing and chastising those who speak out against the men that have abused them, instead of treating SA with the seriousness that it deserves. And finally, we see Miss Censordoll's complete obsession and control of her surroundings.
I'm not home yet, Mother. I told you, 9 p.m.
Even going as far as building a scale model of the town in which she is the ruler. And this is because her base sense of control was stripped away from her at birth, as her parents decided to remove her fallopian tubes in order to keep her pure forever, which also explains her obsession with hatching eggs, as it's something that her body cannot do naturally. And in my view, Alone is one of my favourite episodes of Moral Orel because it handles women's abuse in such a serious way, and a way that many other cartoons and animated shows just simply gloss over. So, if you look at the difference between season 1 and season 3, it really hits home just how dark the show has gotten. In fact, as show creator Dino Stamatopoulos states in an interview, it was this episode that made Adult Swim pull the plug on Moral Orel for getting, quote, too depressing. But were Adult Swim right to do so? You see, I personally think that Adult Swim showed their hypocrisy in cancelling Moral Orel for this episode, as the show details some truly horrific abuse and neglect throughout its 3 series. But as soon as women's trauma is explored, that's when it suddenly becomes too far. And honestly, I think the cancellation of Moral Orel is arguably Adult Swim's most unjust. So, what is the moral of the story? Well, what I would say is that to any upcoming and aspiring animators, please don't be afraid to tackle the weird, wild, and wonderful, even if it gets depressing sometimes. I mean, hey, look at shows like BoJack Horseman and even elements of Rick and Morty, where the show's creators haven't been afraid to try new things. And as a result of this, we have some of the best animation of the past few decades. Especially in an era where animation is becoming so bland and ordinary, we need more voices to stand up and stand out. However, one thing I will say about moral Orel is that I'm truly glad that Orel was finally able to break the cycle of abuse and not succumb to the cruelty of Moralton. And as always, stay happy, stay safe, stay moral.